16 disturbing cases, 7 horrifying levels, 1 seriously haunting iceberg. New York is no stranger to controversy, nor is it a stranger to absolutely insane true stories. I won't bore you with a long intro, so I'm gonna shut up in 3, 2, 1. Love ya. For years, Anthony Griffin followed almost the same route through New York City. He would leave his apartment in Long Island City, walk to Vernon Boulevard, and take the number 7 train into Manhattan. At Grand Central, he transferred to the number 6 and continued north toward the Bronx neighborhood where he had grown up. Many passengers knew him as the man in robes, carrying a carved wooden staff. Griffin moved through train carriages, combining religious speeches with freestyle rap. To some, he was the Messiah. Years earlier, he had been a respected battle rapper known as Fox 5, performing in barbershops, community centers, and competitions across New York, Philadelphia, and New Jersey. Music had occupied him since childhood. He filled scraps of paper with lyrics and built a reputation for thinking quickly enough to answer opponents in real time. But in his 20s, he moved away from battle rap and deeper into religious study. He adopted the name Almighty Godflow and increasingly presented himself as a preacher. Over time, friends said he became more isolated. When Griffin's mother passed away from cancer in October 2021, his circumstances deteriorated. Her name had been on the lease of their Bronx apartment, and Griffin was forced to leave. By the following year, he had entered New York's shelter system. He continued performing on subway trains, sometimes mixing references to his mother, religion, and his own loneliness into the same freestyle. Eventually, he secured an apartment through the city's housing lottery and moved into a high-rise near the Queens waterfront. Residents remembered different versions of him. Some found him energetic and unpredictable. Others described a friendly neighbor who stopped to speak with dog owners and offered warm goodbyes when he believed he was moving away. On the morning of April 11, 2026, Griffin began his familiar journey. He boarded the number 7 train at Vernon Boulevard and traveled to Grand Central. But after arriving at the station, he stepped onto the platform, carrying a large bladed implement. An 84-year-old man was the first person attacked. Griffin struck him across the head and face before moving upstairs toward the platform serving the 4, 5, and 6 trains. There, a 65-year-old man suffered serious injuries to his head, including an open skull fracture. A 70-year-old woman was wounded across the shoulder. None of the 3 victims appeared to know Griffin or one another. They had simply crossed his path inside one of the busiest transportation hubs in the United States. A commuter found 2 transit detectives and directed them toward the platform. As the officers approached the stairs, they encountered one of the injured passengers moving away from the scene. Then they saw Griffin. He stood holding the implement above his shoulder. The officers immediately ordered him to put it down. He refused and retreated toward the platform. The detectives followed but continued trying to end the encounter without further force. Their body-worn cameras recorded them, repeatedly telling Griffin that nobody wanted to hurt him and that they could get him help. More than 20 commands were given. Griffin shouted that he did not want to be there and told the officers to fire. As they pleaded with him to stop, he raised the weapon and declared that he was Lucifer. He then advanced toward them. One detective fired twice. Griffin fell and both officers immediately attempted to save his life. He was transported to Bellevue Hospital, where his time on this earth ended. All 3 passengers survived. For Griffin's family and childhood friends, the final words captured at Grand Central were especially difficult to understand. They remembered a man who had spent years describing himself as deeply religious, even divine. One cousin could not reconcile that person with the figure on the platform, claiming to be Lucifer. On October 30th, 2025, a downpour overwhelmed parts of New York City. Water rushed through streets, poured into buildings and flooded basements, faster than the drainage system could carry it away. In Crown Heights, Brooklyn, 39-year-old Aaron Akaberry was inside a basement apartment with several animals when the water began rising. He managed to escape with one dog and a cat, reaching safety while neighbors watched the basement fill. But 2 animals were still inside. People warned Aaron not to go back. The water was already dangerous, the basement almost submerged, and rescue crews had not yet arrived. Aaron ignored the warnings and went back down for his second dog and another cat. He did not return. Neighbors called his name through a window, hoping he had found another way out. There was no answer. By the time firefighters arrived, the water was so deep that an FDNY diving team had to enter the building. Aaron was eventually pulled from the basement and taken to Kings County Hospital, where his time on this earth was officially called. His pets would also not be lucky enough to escape. Reports differed on whether Aaron drowned or encountered an electrical hazard in the flooded room, and it still seems unclear now. Aaron had a complicated reputation in the neighborhood. He was a convicted dealer and a controversial character, but those who knew him remembered what he did in his final moments. He had already reached safety. Then he turned around, went back into the water, and risked everything for the animals that depended, trusted, and relied upon him to protect them. In 2012, Kathleen Mangan Valley became concerned about the amount of time her husband was spending online. Gilberto Valley was a 6-year veteran of the New York City Police Department, assigned to Manhattan's 26th precinct. The couple had met through an online dating site, married in 2010, and recently had a daughter. But after the child was born, Kathleen noticed a change. Valley became distant, remained on the computer until the early morning, and began asking unusual questions about her routine. When she discovered that he had been visiting extreme adult interest websites, she installed monitoring software on their shared computer. What appeared on the screen was far beyond anything she had expected. Kathleen found thousands of messages, photographs of herself, and images of women they both knew. In conversations with users of one dark website, Valley discussed capturing, seriously violating, harming, and consuming people. Some messages placed Kathleen herself at the center of these scenarios. She fled the apartment with their daughter, traveled to Nevada, and handed the computer to authorities. Investigators discovered that Valley had discussed more than 100 women across dozens of conversations. Some were strangers, but others were former classmates, friends, and acquaintances, whose real names and photographs he had used. He researched methods of restraining people and accessed a police database to locate information connected to at least one woman. The discovery created an immediate question. Were these messages evidence of a genuine plan, or were they elaborate fantasies shared between anonymous users? Prosecutors believed Valley had crossed the line. They argued that using real women, personal information, and police resources showed movement from imagination into preparation. He was arrested in October 2012, dismissed from the NYPD, and charged with conspiracy to commit kidnapping and unlawfully accessing a law enforcement database. Valley's defense accepted that the conversations were disturbing. However, his lawyers argued that he never intended to act on them. In most of his exchanges, Valley described the discussions as imaginary. No woman had been abducted or physically harmed, and many supposed plans contained impossible details, conflicting dates, or arrangements that were never followed. A jury found him guilty in March 2013. The conspiracy conviction exposed him to the possibility of life in prison. Valley remained incarcerated for 21 months, including 7 months in solitary confinement. Then, in June 2014, the judge who had overseen the trial overturned the most serious conviction. Once the exaggerations and invented details were removed, the judge concluded that the evidence demonstrated deeply alarming online roleplay, but not proof beyond a reasonable doubt of a genuine agreement to kidnap someone. Valley was released and sentenced to time already served on the remaining computer charge. In December 2015, an appeals court went further. It upheld the conspiracy acquittal and overturned the database conviction as well. Valley had lost his career, marriage, and almost 2 years of freedom, but his connection to the case did not end there. He later published a memoir titled Raw Deal. the untold story of NYPD's Cannibal Cop. He then released the horror novel, A Gathering of Evil, which followed a group of sadists who captured 2 young New Yorkers. Vallee described it as extremely graphic but entirely fictional, explaining that writing offered him a possible way to earn a living after losing his position with the police. I think this case raises some interesting issues. In a way, it sounds obvious that someone should be punished for allegedly making plans and researching victims. But then, if it was never acted on, are we just talking about thought police territory? Please do share your thoughts in the comments.
The neck was almost as fat as my face. My nose is broken. Here, you can see the swollenness here.
On the evening of September 13th, 2024, 81-year-old Gula Freeman stepped outside her Upper West Side apartment to walk her son's golden doodle. It was around 7 o'clock, still early enough for the pavements near West 66th Street and Amsterdam Avenue to be busy. Freeman had lived in the neighborhood since 2007. She regularly visited Lincoln Center and knew the streets well. There was no reason to believe this short dog walk would be any different from the hundreds she had taken before. As Freeman stood beside the building with the dog, a man in a black t-shirt walked past her. There was no argument. They did not appear to exchange words or even acknowledge one another. He simply continued along the pavement. Then he stopped. The security camera watching the street captured the man turning around and walking back towards Freeman. She remained unaware of him as he approached from behind. Within seconds, he pulled back his arm and struck the side of her face with enough force to send her into the wall of the building. Freeman immediately collapsed onto the pavement. The dog remained beside her as she lay unconscious. A passerby turned around and moved towards her. A nearby doorman and other witnesses rushed over to help. The attacker, meanwhile, did something almost as strange as the assault itself. After walking away from the woman he had just knocked unconscious, he reportedly flagged down a doorman and told him to call an ambulance. Then he left. When Freeman regained consciousness, the attack had vanished from her memory. She could not remember the man walking past her. She could not remember the punch, hitting the building or collapsing onto the pavement. Her first clear memory was of sitting inside her sister's apartment. The sisters lived in the same building. Freeman had bruising across her face and body, a fractured nose, a concussion and pain in her neck and head. Her face throbbed, and she suffered from a severe headache. Doctors told her she had lost consciousness, and that the impact could easily have killed her. Yet the most disturbing part for Freeman was the complete blank space in her mind. "I have total amnesia," she said. 100%, not even a little bit. She only understood what happened because other people described it to her and because the surveillance camera had recorded it. She was left examining the injuries on her own face as evidence of an experience she could not remember. Had the man tried to steal her bag or take something from her, Freeman believed the attack might at least have had a recognizable motive. Instead, he appeared to have chosen her for no reason at all. He had walked past, changed his mind, and returned to strike an elderly stranger. "It was a random act of craziness," Freeman said. "I happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time." The violence was especially alarming because Freeman was not the only elderly woman attacked in the neighborhood that day. Several hours earlier, at around 2 in the afternoon, a 77-year-old woman had been walking along West 72nd Street, close to Columbus Avenue, when another man approached and punched her in the left eye. She suffered minor injuries and did not require hospital treatment. The attacker fled west along 72nd Street. Police believe the assaults were unrelated, but the similarities were impossible for local residents to ignore. 2 elderly women attacked without warning, only a few streets and several hours apart. Some people living nearby began looking over their shoulders. One resident said she no longer felt comfortable going out alone. Another worried about his 2 teenage daughters, who regularly walked through the same area. Freeman refused to allow the fear to control her life, although her habits changed. She began paying closer attention to anyone approaching her and kept her distance from people who appeared unpredictable. For a time, she avoided traveling on the subway, where crowded carriages could leave her with nowhere to move. But she remained remarkably compassionate towards the man who had attacked her. Rather than demanding revenge, Freeman said she hoped he would receive psychiatric help. She believed somebody willing to attack a stranger without motive must have been deeply unwell. Almost a month after the assault, police arrested 37-year-old Staten Island resident Hansel Esparragoza. He was charged with second-degree assault in connection with the attack captured on camera. Freeman said she was relieved that he was no longer on the street, but she still hoped his arrest would lead to treatment rather than simply punishment. The footage had preserved the moments her mind could not. What she chose to remember instead was that she had survived. "People ask me why I'm in a good mood," she said. "I'm in a good mood because I'm alive and I can tell my story." For Gula Freeman, September 13th became more than the night a stranger attacked her. It became the day she was given what she described as a second lease on life. On the evening of May 7, 2026, 76-year-old Ross Falzone walked north along 7th Avenue in Manhattan toward the 18th Street subway station. Ross had spent much of his working life helping other people. He was a retired special education teacher with an extensive academic background, including studies at Bloomsburg, Marywood, and Columbia University. He lived on the Upper West Side, enjoyed attending performances at the Lincoln Center, and was remembered by neighbors as a quiet, kind man. His sister, Donna, had recently traveled from Pennsylvania to celebrate her birthday with him. She was already planning her next visit. Ross reached the entrance to the station shortly after 9:30 p.m. and paused at the top of the stairs. Another man had been walking behind him. They did not know each other. They were perfect strangers. As Ross stood above the staircase, the man approached from behind and forcefully pushed him with both hands. Ross was thrown forward and fell head-first down the stairs. People nearby called for help. When officers reached him, Ross was unconscious and unresponsive at the bottom of the staircase. He had suffered a serious brain injury, damage to his spine and fractured ribs. Paramedics transported him to Bellevue Hospital at around 10 p.m. His condition continued to deteriorate as bleeding inside his brain progressed. Shortly before 3 o'clock the following morning, Ross Falzone's time on this earth ended. The man accused of pushing him was identified as 32-year-old Ramel Burke, a former professional dancer who had once performed on Broadway in productions including King Kong. His path to the 18th Street station that evening had begun several hours earlier, outside a police building on East 51st Street. At approximately 3:30 that afternoon, officers encountered Burke, behaving erratically near the 17th Precinct station house. He reportedly removed a stick from a pile of rubbish and approached them while holding it. One officer managed to calm the situation and persuaded him to drop the object. Rather than arrest Burke, police transported him directly to Bellevue Hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. He arrived at approximately 3:39 p.m. A little over an hour later, Burke was released. Approximately 5 hours after leaving the hospital, surveillance cameras recorded the apparently unprovoked encounter with Ross at the subway entrance. Burke was not located immediately. The following afternoon, officers found him back inside the subway system, standing on a northbound C&E train platform at Penn Station. He was taken into custody and charged with second-degree murder. The circumstances quickly raised a question, extending beyond what happened on the staircase. Burke had reportedly been arrested several times since February, including incidents involving an alleged attack on a Port Authority officer and the alleged assault of a stranger. At the time Ross was pushed, Burke was already on supervised release. More significantly, police officers had recognized that he appeared to be in crisis only hours earlier. They had personally transported him to a hospital equipped to evaluate psychiatric emergencies. Yet, he had returned to the streets that same afternoon. New York City ordered an investigation into how the evaluation and discharge had been handled. The review was intended to determine whether different steps could have prevented what followed. For Donna Falzone, those questions could not change the telephone call she received at 4 o'clock in the morning. She described Ross as physically frail, weighing less than 100 pounds, and incapable of hurting anyone. Within the space of just hours, Ross was inside the same hospital complex from which his attacker had recently been released. At just after midday, Leonard Shoulders walked towards a bus stop in the Bronx. Around him, people waited or looked at their phones. A normal day in a city that, admittedly, does like to drop a surprise or two. And a surprise was about to take Leonard to a whole new subterranean world. The concrete of the pavement cracked beneath Leonard's feet. Leonard tried to catch himself, but the sidewalk opened and pulled him into an underground vault. He fell between 12 and 15 feet as concrete struck him on the way down. When witnesses reached the edge, they could barely see him below. He was alive, but he was not alone. The vault was filled with rats. Leonard's family said they crawled across him while he lay injured and unable to move. He was so frightened that he refused to shout, afraid that opening his mouth would allow one of them inside. From above, bystanders asked him to move his hand if he could hear them. It was almost the only response he could give. Police and firefighters worked for half an hour before lifting him out. Leonard was taken to hospital with injuries to his head, face, arms, and legs. He also suffered a spinal fracture and initially lost feeling in parts of his body. Inspectors found that the vault beneath the sidewalk was in disrepair. The building was vacated and fenced off, while responsibility was investigated. Leonard survived, but his family said the experience left him traumatized. An ordinary wait for a bus had become the kind of nightmare New Yorkers joked about, until it happened for real. On the morning of July 12, 2016, a block on the border of Brooklyn's Bedford-Stuyvesant and Bushwick neighborhoods began to look strangely unfamiliar. People were standing in the street with empty expressions. Some could barely remain upright. Others moved their arms and legs slowly, as though every action had to be remembered before it could be performed. A few groaned without explanation. Witnesses began filming, and one description spread quickly across the city. It looked like Zombieland. Emergency crews arrived to find a mass casualty incident unfolding near Myrtle Avenue and Broadway. 33 people had been exposed to an unknown substance. 18 men, aged between 25 and 59, were transported to nearby hospitals. 8 identified themselves as homeless. Among them was a 28-year-old man who stared blankly when paramedics tried to speak to him. He could respond, but only slowly. At the hospital, he drifted between lethargy and awareness, reacting when touched but struggling to behave normally. His movements became mechanical. At intervals, he groaned and appeared detached from everything happening around him. Doctors checked for the substances they usually encountered. They tested for illicit stimulants, alcohol, and several other substances that shouldn't have been there. The results came back normal. His heart rhythm was stable. There was no obvious injury, and no familiar explanation for what they were seeing. For 9 hours, hospital staff could do little more than monitor him, provide oxygen, and wait. Gradually, the blankness lifted. His behavior returned to normal. He could only explain that he had inhaled something from a packet for the first time. That packet became the key. The product was called AK-47 24-karat gold, a mixture of herbal material divided into small blue bags. Although products like this were often described as synthetic marijuana, the name concealed how different and unpredictable they could be. Scientists tested the packet alongside blood and urine samples, taken from 8 patients. Inside was an extremely powerful synthetic cannabinoid. Its breakdown product appeared in every patient tested, and no other illicit substance was detected. This synthetic substance was estimated to be 85 times as potent as THC, the main psychoactive chemical in the common green plant. It was also around 50 times stronger than the chemical found in some earlier K2 products. The strength explained the scene outside the subway station. Rather than producing the effects users may have expected, the substance severely depressed the central nervous system. People became almost immobilized with blank stares, slow movements, and little ability to understand or control what was happening around them. All of this came from a cheap herbal mixture that could be produced in enormous quantities. Researchers calculated that 1 kilogram of the chemical could potentially be spread across more than 15,000 packets, creating close to $500,000 in sales. The Brooklyn outbreak ended without fatalities, and the patients recovered. But it exposed a disturbing reality. The people lying across that pavement had unknowingly become human test subjects for a chemical powerful enough to turn a city block into a medical emergency, powerful enough to bring zombies to New York City. In May 2025, security cameras across New York City began capturing something strange. In the middle of the night, groups of people were lifting manhole covers and disappearing beneath the streets. The first known sighting came on May 5th in Astoria, Queens. At around 2 in the morning, 3 people wearing waterproof hip waders and protective clothing approached a manhole near 20th Avenue and 36th Street. Footage from a nearby business showed them carrying flashlights as they pried open the heavy cover. One by one, they climbed down into the darkness. The final person pulled the cover shut behind them, leaving no sign they had ever been there. Aki Jakupovic, whose surveillance cameras recorded the scene, watched the group from nearby. 3 random guys walking around in a strange suit, open the sewer, go in like Ninja Turtles, he later said. The men looked back at him before vanishing underground. Several weeks later, it happened again. At around 11 o'clock on the night of May 28th, 8 people removed a manhole cover on McDonald Avenue in Brooklyn. They descended into the sewer and remained below the city for approximately 3 hours. Shortly after 2 in the morning, the cover moved. One person climbed out, followed by another and then another. Soon, the entire group was standing beside the road in wet protective clothing. Several parked cars appeared to be waiting for them. The group immediately began changing into clean clothes before throwing their dirty equipment into the vehicles and driving away. Just hours later, another camera recorded a similar scene in Williamsburg. Around 7 or 8 people emerged from a manhole in the middle of an intersection. Some wore headlamps. Others carried what appeared to be shovels and tools. Cars continued passing as they pulled themselves onto the road, and one of the men narrowly avoided being struck. The final person replaced the cover behind them. Nobody knew who they were or what they had been doing beneath the streets for several hours. Police sent emergency service unit officers into the sewer system to search for anything suspicious. The Department of Environmental Protection also inspected the tunnels and equipment. They found no damage, no dangerous devices, and no immediate threat to the public. The leading theory was that the groups were searching for valuables that had fallen or washed into the sewer system, jewelry, coins, wallets, weapons, or scrap metal. Others suggested they were urban explorers looking for abandoned tunnels and forgotten pieces of New York's underground history. But experienced urban explorers were skeptical. Several said that New York sewers were too dangerous and unpleasant to attract ordinary explorers. The tunnels could contain toxic gases, unstable surfaces, and sudden floods. There was almost no phone signal, meaning anyone injured below ground could be completely cut off. One explorer believed the people on camera looked too organized. They had protective equipment, tools, vehicles waiting for them, and clean clothes prepared for the moment they resurfaced. Whatever they were searching for, they appeared to know exactly where they were going. No arrests were made, and it remained unclear whether the different groups were connected. The cameras had only captured their entrances and exits. What happened during the hours they spent beneath New York City remained hidden underground. One of the men was said to be wearing a purple gown, have whiskers, a long rat-like tail, and go by the name Splinter.
Like, what the heck is going on? I'm like, why am I here? Like, what's going on? How did I get to this point?
Linda Stein was never supposed to become a New York power player. She was the daughter of a kosher caterer, raised in Riverdale, and began her working life as a 5th grade teacher in the Bronx. It was respectable work, but Linda was drawn towards a louder world. A blind date with record executive Seymour Stein gave her a way into it. Seymour was building Sire Records, and Linda did not remain quietly in the background. She loved rock and roll and had the confidence to tell powerful people exactly what she thought. By the mid-1970s, she and music executive Danny Fields were managing the Ramones, a group whose short, aggressive songs sounded unlike anything on mainstream radio. Linda helped take them beyond New York's cramped clubs and into Britain, where their international reputation began to grow. Her world became places like CBGB in Studio 54, and friendships with people who would become cultural icons. Elton John knew her before global fame, while David Bowie, Bob Dylan and the Ramones became intertwined with her life story. Linda had crossed from a Bronx classroom into the center of the music business, not through inherited wealth or the Nepo baby route, but through force of personality. Her marriage to Seymour ended in the late 1970s, and her work with the Ramones eventually ended too. Linda responded by reinventing herself. She moved into real estate with almost no experience. What she did have was a rare understanding of famous people. She knew how to speak to them without intimidation, how to handle their demands, and how to tell them when they were making a mistake. Her former life became her client list. Billy Joel, Sting, Madonna, Steven Spielberg, Angelina Jolie and Elton John trusted her with multi-million-dollar properties. Linda became known as the broker to the stars. She was only 5 feet tall, but friends described a presence that could dominate a room. She could be funny and generous, but also demanding, profane and volcanic. Linda did not soften herself for anyone. That intensity helped create her success, but it also damaged friendships and unsettled colleagues. By 2007, the energy that had carried her through 2 careers was meeting physical limits. Linda had survived breast cancer and 2 mastectomies. She was also living with a benign brain tumor and taking medication that left her weakened. Her right arm was numb. An ordinary task such as combing her hair had become difficult. That summer, 26-year-old Natavia Lowry became her personal assistant. Some of the work was conventional: calls, contracts, and appointments. Other duties were unusually intimate. Natavia jogged with Linda and helped wash and style her hair. People around them initially saw little cause for concern. Linda even praised her work and once arranged for Natavia's boyfriend to visit for her birthday. But beneath the surface, something more serious was developing. Natavia had begun using Linda's identity to obtain credit and build up approximately $30,000 in unauthorized charges. A note was placed on Linda's mailbox to prevent financial statements from reaching her. The deception could continue only for as long as Linda remained unaware of it. On October 30th, 2007, the mail was delivered. That evening, Linda's daughter Mandy entered the Fifth Avenue penthouse with a friend. At first, it appeared her mother might have suffered a fall. Linda was lying face down in the living room, the hood of her sweatshirt pulled over her head. When the hood was moved, the true nature of her injuries became clear.
Help me! Help me! Help me!
Hello? Hello? What happened?
I came home and my mom is in a puddle of blood. Can you just send something?
Yes,
right
ma'am,
now?
I sure can. Miss?
Linda's time on this earth had ended after repeated impacts to her head and neck. There was no forced entry, and nothing obvious appeared to have been taken. The building had doormen, elevator operators, and surveillance cameras. Whoever had been inside the apartment was likely someone Linda knew and trusted enough to let them in. The last person known to have seen her alive was Natavia Lowry. Security footage showed Natavia leaving the building around the relevant time, carrying a bag and looking at the soles of her shoes. When questioned, she initially denied knowing what had happened. Her account then changed. She claimed a masked man had entered the apartment and attacked Linda. After hours of questioning, the story changed again. Natavia admitted that she had struck Linda repeatedly with a weighted exercise stick. She said Linda had been yelling at her and claimed the confrontation escalated after Linda waved the object towards her.
She's pointing the cane at me now, right? So, move the cane. You know how you just like slap it?
Where were you? Still on the couch?
Mm-hmm. So, I'm still on the couch. So, she's like waving the cane and stuff at me. Then it's like, I don't know, like after that remark and stuff, and you know, her screaming and yelling, I just snatched it from her, took it, and it's like, I just hit her with it.
Where about her body?
Like right here. But it's long. So, you know.
After the first time she fell, and then you continued to hit her on the head with the stick?
Yes.
Do you know how many times you hit her?
That wasn't myself. I don't I can't count. I was mad. I was confused. I was angry, paranoid. It was like a feeling like I never had before. It felt like she was like my worst enemy, you know? So it's like, how do you go from somebody, you know, like a best friend, you know, to an enemy, you know?
Natavia also claimed Linda had blown green smoke into her face, although toxicology testing found no substances in Linda's system. The investigation revealed that the violence was followed by further attempts to conceal what had happened. Natavia answered Linda's phone and told a caller that she could not come to it. She left the apartment, returned the phone, and later used Linda's bank card to withdraw $800. Natavia eventually withdrew her confession and maintained that investigators had pressured her into admitting responsibility. Her defense challenged the length and conditions of the interrogation, while her family insisted she was incapable of the attack. The case was not left unresolved. Prosecutors presented the confession alongside the financial theft, the changing accounts, the security footage, and the bank withdrawal. They argued that Linda had discovered, or was about to discover, those unauthorized credit charges and confronted her assistant. In February 2010, a jury found Natavia Lowry guilty of second-degree murder and grand larceny. That May, she received the maximum sentence of 25 years to life, with additional time for stealing from Linda. Linda Stein had spent decades forcing open doors, first for a band few people understood, and then for herself, in a profession built around wealth, secrecy, and status. Her daughter Mandy later dedicated a documentary about CBGB to her. At Linda's funeral, Seymour admitted that after her death, he called her mobile phone 5 times simply to hear her voice. For all the famous names attached to Linda Stein, that detail brings her back to human scale. Behind the legend was a mother, former wife, and friend whose life had survived illness, divorce, and repeated reinvention, only to be ended inside her own home by the assistant she had trusted to help her. Carol Acosta built her career by turning the treatment that once hurt her into the message that made millions of people feel understood. Born in the Dominican Republic, Carol moved to the United States when she was 12. She was bullied because of her weight, but instead of allowing that experience to define her, she began using humor, confidence, and honesty to push back against it. Online, she became known as Killer Demente. Her posts focused on self-acceptance, body confidence, and the refusal to live according to other people's standards. More than 6.7 million people followed her on Instagram, where she spoke openly about her life, her struggles, and her role as a mother. In 2017, she released a song titled, "I Love Myself, and I Don't Care." It captured the attitude that had made her successful. She could be mocked, criticized, or knocked down, but she would continue standing up for herself. By the beginning of 2025, Carol was 27 years old, raising 2 young children and expecting her third. Just one day before her death, she appeared online in a black dress, speaking with the same confidence her followers had come to recognize. Then, on January the 3rd, 2025, Carol was having dinner with relatives in New York when she suddenly began choking and struggling to breathe. Her family said she then suffered some kind of attack, reportedly cardiac arrest, and was rushed to hospital. Doctors were unable to save her. Although formal post-mortem results were still pending when the family spoke publicly, they consistently described Carol's passing as being from choking on her food. Choking can become fatal within seconds, and in the United States alone, 5,553 people passed from choking during 2022. Carol's sister confirmed the news online, describing her as her sister, partner, and best friend. The family created a GoFundMe to raise money for Carol's children. Carol had traveled from the Dominican Republic to New York, survived years of ridicule, and built a community around refusing to feel ashamed. At only 27, that life ended during an ordinary family dinner. It just goes to show, you really never know. On the night of January 26, 2005, Nicole Dufresne appeared to be moving closer to the life she had traveled to New York to build. The 28-year-old actress and playwright had just started working as a bartender at Rockwood Music Hall on Manhattan's Lower East Side. It was the venue's opening night, and her fiancé, Jeffrey Sparks, joined Nicole's close friend Mary Jane Gibson and Mary Jane's boyfriend, Scott Nath, to celebrate. Nicole had studied theatre at Emerson College, acted in small productions, and co-written a play with Mary Jane that toured fringe festivals in the United States and Canada. She and Jeffrey had moved to New York 2 years earlier. They were planning to marry that October, while Nicole continued writing and performing. After Nicole finished her shift, the four friends went to Max Fish on Ludlow Street. They drank, played pinball, and stayed into the early morning. When they finally left shortly before 3 a.m., they walked through the Lower East Side, laughing and pushing one another into the snowbanks. Several blocks away, 7 young people had left an apartment in the Baruch houses, looking for trouble. The group included 19-year-old Rudy Fleming, his girlfriend Ashley Evans, and 5 friends and relatives, some only teenagers. Fleming was carrying a .357 Magnum revolver. Earlier that night, they had targeted security guard Adam Chavez because Fleming wanted his white leather jacket. Chavez was struck and chased but escaped into the road. The group then traveled to Brooklyn, where they tried to provoke more confrontations before returning to Manhattan. At approximately 3 a.m., the 7 reached Clinton Street, just as Nicole and her friends walked past. Their laughter caught Evans' attention. She later explained that the 4 seemed extremely happy, and that their happiness made her angry. She identified them as the people the group should confront. Fleming stepped into their path, displayed the revolver, and demanded money. Jeffrey initially did not understand what was happening. He tried to push past, and Fleming struck him across the left side of his face with the weapon. The impact opened an injury near Jeffrey's eye and left him dazed. Another robber, Savizio Simmons, said, "It doesn't have to be like this. My friend's bugging. We just want the money." Nicole immediately moved towards Jeffrey and asked whether he was all right. Jeffrey told everyone they should leave and began moving north with Scott. Mary Jane's handbag and telephone were taken and passed to the 2 girls in the group. Jeffrey believed Nicole was following him. She was not. Nicole remained close to the attackers, focused on what had happened to the people she loved. She confronted Fleming and demanded to know whether he intended to fire the weapon. Fleming pushed her backwards. Nicole regained her balance and repeated the question. She said, "What are you going to do? Are you going to shoot us? Is that what you wanted?" The distance between them had narrowed to only a few feet. Fleming raised the revolver. A single deafening blast broke across Clinton Street, and Nicole was struck in the chest. Scott and Jeffrey turned and ran back. Nicole had fallen onto her back in the street. Jeffrey knelt beside her and held her as Mary Jane and Scott gathered around them. Nicole remained conscious for at least part of those final moments, but the injury had reached her heart. Her time on this earth ended shortly afterwards at Beth Israel Medical Center. The 7 fled, but surveillance footage and witness information quickly led police straight to them. The revolver was recovered beneath a bed in the apartment, where several members of the group had been staying. Accounts from Fleming's companions directly rejected the suggestion that the weapon had discharged accidentally. Yet public discussion soon centered on Nicole's words, rather than Fleming's decision. Newspapers, television programs, and crime prevention organizations questioned whether she had made a fatal mistake by deciding to confront rather than leave. Some coverage reduced her final moments to a warning about how victims should behave during a robbery. Jeffrey rejected that interpretation. Nicole had not been daring Fleming to use the weapon. In his view, she was trying to make him recognize the absurdity of what he was doing and give everyone a chance to walk away. Her family also defended her, arguing that she had acted instinctively after her fiancé was injured and her closest friend was robbed. In October 2006, Fleming was convicted of first-degree murder, robbery and attempted robbery, and unlawful possession of a weapon. He had already been on parole after previously pointing a firearm at a truancy officer. 2 months later, he received life in prison without the possibility of parole, followed by an additional 30 years for the other offences committed that night. Several accomplices received separate sentences or plea agreements. Evans, whose anger had directed the group towards the 4 laughing friends, was sentenced to 6 years for first-degree robbery. Nicole's family described their own punishment more simply. Fleming's sentence would be served inside prison. Theirs was life without Nicole. Just a quick one. For some reason, my videos are normally seen by just 1 to 2% of my subscribers. I actually don't know why. Regardless of the reasons, it's making it extremely challenging to keep this show on the road. And I promise I don't like to do this. It makes me feel like Oliver Twist or something. But please do consider becoming a channel member. There are currently 343 of you, and I'm aiming for the crazy goal of 1,000 by the end of 2026. You get things like early access to videos, our behind-the-scenes podcast, and of course my eternal gratitude. Thank you, and I love you all. Now, back to the video. On the night of April 15th, 2023, 20-year-old Kaylin Gillis was traveling through rural Washington County, New York, with friends. They were trying to find another friend's house near Hebron, a small town of dark roads, scattered properties, and unreliable mobile reception. Kaylin was in the front passenger seat of a Ford Explorer, driven by her boyfriend, Blake Walsh. Jacob Haynes and Alexandra Whiting sat behind them. They were part of a larger group traveling in 2 vehicles and on a motorcycle, following directions through an area where one long driveway could easily resemble another. At approximately 9:45 p.m., the group turned onto a steep driveway, leading to a house owned by 65-year-old Kevin Monahan. The property sat above Patterson Hill Road on a rural ridgetop. Within moments, they realized their mistake. Nobody stepped out. Nobody approached the house. They simply began turning around and backing away. Inside, Monahan heard the vehicles and motorcycle. He later claimed that he believed he and his wife were under siege. He told her to hide in a closet, loaded a 20-gauge pump-action shotgun, and walked outside. The young people were already leaving when the first deafening blast was heard. Monahan fired once as the vehicles moved away. He later described it as a warning shot, intended to begin a dialogue, although the people in the driveway had not confronted him or tried to enter the house. Then he fired again. The second round tore into the Ford Explorer and struck Kaylin in the neck. Blake accelerated away as the others tried to understand what had happened. They attempted to call 911, but the weak signal in the area prevented the call from connecting. The group continued towards the neighboring town of Salem. Kaylin's friends were trapped inside the vehicle with her, searching for reception while every lost minute reduced the chance that help would actually arrive in time. Around 5 miles from the house, the emergency call finally connected. First responders reached them on Cemetery Road and began CPR. But Kaylin's time on this earth had already ended. She had graduated from Schuylerville High School in 2021, where she was an honor student and a flyer on the cheerleading team. Her family described her as a talented artist, animal lover, and devoted friend who hoped to study in Florida and become a marine biologist or veterinarian. While emergency workers attended to Kaylin, officers traveled to Monahan's home. He would not come down the driveway. For roughly an hour, he remained inside, speaking with a dispatcher and his attorney while police ordered him to surrender. Monahan initially claimed he had been in bed since 8:30. He suggested that hunters might have fired the shots. Officers saw him pacing inside the brightly lit house, but he continued refusing to approach them. A specialist police team eventually drove up the driveway in an armored vehicle and took him into custody. The question was not whether Monahan had fired the shotgun. The dispute became why he fired it, and whether the second shot had been intentional. At trial, Monahan said the vehicles made him fear an invasion. He claimed that after firing into the air, he began lowering the weapon as the group left. According to his account, he was wearing flip-flops when he stumbled over loose nails on his deck. The shotgun struck the decking and discharged accidentally. But when shown a photograph of the deck, Monahan could not identify the nails that had supposedly caused him to fall. The prosecution also presented evidence that he had attempted to conceal what happened and repeatedly provided false accounts after the shooting. The jurors had to decide whether this was a terrible accident or an act showing complete indifference to the lives inside the departing vehicle. On January 23, 2024, after approximately 2 hours of deliberation, they found Monahan guilty of second-degree murder, reckless endangerment, and tampering with physical evidence. At sentencing, Monahan declined to address the court. Judge Adam Michelini said he had shown no meaningful responsibility and appeared to believe he had been justified. The judge recalled that Monahan had joked when he took the witness stand and spoke about completing work on his house and returning to racing his dirt bike. Those comments stood in sharp contrast to the future taken from Kaylin and the lives permanently changed inside the vehicle. Kaylin's father, Andrew Gillis, described his daughter as the pride and joy of their family. Blake told Monahan that everyone knew the shooting had not been an accident. Alexandra described living with constant fear since watching her best friend struck beside her. On March 1st, 2024, Monahan received 25 years to life for second-degree murder, followed by an additional term of up to 4 years for tampering with evidence.
In killing Kaylin Gillis, you took away a friend, you took away a girlfriend, you took away a daughter, a granddaughter, and a sibling. You took away so much unrealized potential. Her potential to enrich other people's lives and to contribute to our society. You also traumatized the young men and women who mistakenly drove up your driveway that night. You will scar them, this will scar them and traumatize them for the rest of their lives.
The time it takes to turn a car in the road is how long it took Monahan to make his decision. That is how much thought went into ending Kaylin's time on this earth.
The tenant of the apartment, he came in, he never came out. It feels like the devil just crawled through here.
In the early hours of March 5th, 2024, the 6th floor of 979 Summit Avenue in the Bronx was quiet enough for every sound to travel. At around 1 in the morning, a woman in the building heard 2 gunshots coming from apartment 6G. Then came a man's voice, desperate and clear through the walls. "Please don't, I have a family." A brief pause followed, then 2 more shots. The man inside the apartment was 44-year-old Colin Small. He had grown up in Harlem and had known 48-year-old Sheldon Johnson for years. Their friendship stretched back to childhood, and both men had later spent time in prison, including at Sing Sing. After Johnson was released, Colin's family said he had tried to help his old friend get back on his feet. That made what happened inside the apartment almost impossible to understand. At around 10 o'clock the previous night, Building Superintendent Orlando Medina had seen Colin return home alone. CCTV showed him entering his 6th floor apartment. Nothing strange about that. But during the hours that followed, the same cameras began recording a bizarre sequence of movements in the hallway. A man repeatedly entered and left Colin's apartment. Each time, something about him seemed to change. Sometimes he wore a hat. At another point, he appeared in a blonde wig. He used sunglasses, a mask, and different sets of clothing. In one of the most unsettling moments captured by the cameras, he appeared to leave wearing the same clothes Colin had been wearing when he arrived home. The disguises did not make him disappear. They only made the footage more suspicious. The man also carried items in and out, rubbish bags, cleaning products, and containers. At one stage, the cameras recorded him returning with a large blue bin. To anyone casually watching, it might have looked like somebody moving household items, but Medina already knew something was wrong. A resident had told him about the gunshots and the pleading voice. More importantly, Colin had entered his apartment and had not been seen leaving it. The man on the CCTV, however, kept coming and going. Medina reviewed the footage and became increasingly concerned. He recognized the visitor as someone he had seen with Colin before, but the changing outfit, cleaning supplies, and blue container suggested that whatever was happening inside apartment 6G was not normal. At around 11:30 that morning, Medina called 911 and requested a wellness check. Officers arrived at approximately 8:25 that evening. When they reached Colin's apartment, Sheldon Johnson was there. Johnson reportedly claimed Colin had gone upstate, but the security footage told a different story. It showed Colin entering alone the previous evening. It showed Johnson moving through the building repeatedly after the sounds of gunfire, and it did not show Colin leaving. Police detained Johnson and searched the apartment. Inside, they found the large blue bin and plastic containers. What had looked semi-ordinary on the CCTV was now at the center of a horrifying discovery. Remains were found inside, including Colin's torso and feet. The search then expanded beyond the Bronx. Investigators connected Johnson to an apartment on 5th Avenue in Harlem, and there, inside a freezer, more of Colin's remains were discovered, including his head and limbs. Police also found Colin's vehicle near Johnson's home. Inside were hacksaw blades, while other items linked to the investigation reportedly included concrete and a protective Tyvek suit. The CCTV footage had captured almost every stage of the alleged attempt to conceal what happened. It showed the disguises. It showed the cleaning supplies. It showed the bags and containers. It showed one man leaving the apartment again and again. The case became even more shocking because of who Sheldon Johnson appeared to have become. Johnson had spent roughly 25 years in prison after receiving a lengthy sentence for attempted murder and robbery. During his incarceration, he said he had left gang life behind, earned his GED, completed college courses, and helped create rehabilitation programs. After his release in 2023, he worked with Queen's Defenders and spoke publicly about rehabilitation and helping young people avoid his mistakes. On February 1st, 2024, just over a month before Colin's death, Johnson appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience. Sitting in the studio, he described the moment he had supposedly decided to change his life. He spoke about his family, his children, and the reputation he no longer wanted to carry. "I've been doing bad for so long," he said. "I'm going to try to do something good." The appearance presented Johnson as an example of rehabilitation, a former gang member who had survived decades in prison and returned to society determined to help others. One of the people appearing alongside him described him as a miracle. Then, only weeks later, cameras recorded him doing what he did. Investigators considered several possible motives. Colin's relatives said the men had been arguing over money. Police also found a kilo press inside the apartment, raising the possibility that illicit substances or unpaid debts played a role. There were also reports of an old dispute connected to their years in prison. Johnson was arrested and charged with offences including murder, robbery, burglary, weapon possession, evidence tampering, and concealment of a human body. He pleaded not guilty and shouted, "I'm innocent," as reporters watched him being led away in handcuffs. There was so much potential to be an inspiration here, to be a success story, but this rehabilitation really couldn't have gone much worse. Before Jordan Neely became the center of one of New York City's most divisive subway cases, he was known for dancing. Wearing clothes inspired by Michael Jackson, Jordan performed in Times Square and across the subway system. He could moonwalk through a station, draw a crowd, and briefly transform an ordinary journey into a street performance. People who knew him described a naturally talented entertainer who wanted to connect with others. But behind those performances was a life shaped by an experience few children could process. Jordan was 14 when his mother was murdered by her partner. Her body was concealed inside a suitcase and abandoned beside a New York highway. Jordan was later required to testify about what had happened. Relatives said his mental health deteriorated after her death. He developed depression, post-traumatic stress, and schizophrenia, while periods in foster care added further instability.
They grew up together as foster brothers. To Larry Smith, Jordan Neely was his big brother, best friend, and mentor.
He would always tell me things that he would rather be alone than unhappy.
Smith describes tough times and being moved from home to home over 4 years.
4 years of betrayal, rejection, 4 years of nervousness, 4 years of abandonment, 4 years of pain.
Eventually, they both aged out of the foster care system. Smith and Neely both ended up homeless.
As Jordan grew older, his performances became less frequent, and his contact with homelessness, hospitals, and the criminal justice system became more common. New York outreach workers knew who he was. From 2019, Jordan appeared on an informal city list of homeless people considered most in need of intervention. Attempts were made to place him in permanent accommodation and treatment, but he repeatedly returned to the streets and subway system. On May 1, 2023, Jordan boarded a northbound F train in Manhattan. He was 30 years old, hungry and carrying little more than a muffin. Witnesses said he threw down his jacket and began shouting that he had no food or drink. He said he was tired, that he did not care about returning to jail, and that he was prepared to die. Passengers interpreted the outburst differently. Some said Jordan was frightening but had not physically attacked anyone. Others described him moving aggressively through the carriage, clenching his fists and coming close to people's faces. One mother placed herself and her young child behind a stroller because she feared he might approach them. Daniel Penny was traveling in the same carriage on his way to the gym. The 24-year-old had served 4 years in the United States Marine Corps, where he had received training in physical restraint. As the train moved toward Broadway Lafayette Street, Penny approached Jordan from behind, wrapped an arm around his neck and pulled him to the floor. 2 other passengers helped control Jordan's arms, while people called the police. Jordan struggled, kicked and attempted to pull free. When the train reached the next station, riders held the doors open so officers could enter. The restraint continued. Video captured Penny holding Jordan for several minutes. Near the end, Jordan stopped making purposeful movements. One passenger warned that he could be dying and told Penny that he did not want to face a murder charge. Penny eventually released him and placed him on his side. He told people nearby that Jordan would be all right. When police arrived, Jordan had only a faint pulse. Officers administered first aid before paramedics transported him to hospital, but his time on this earth had ended. Penny told investigators that Jordan had threatened the passengers and that he had only intended to restrain him until help arrived. The medical examiner concluded that Jordan died because of compression to his neck. The case quickly became larger than the encounter itself. To Penny's supporters, he was a former Marine who had intervened when frightened passengers felt trapped. To his critics, he had continued using dangerous force against an unarmed man long after the immediate threat had passed. At trial, passengers confirmed that Jordan's behavior had terrified them. Prosecutors accepted that Penny's original intention may have been to protect others, but argued that the restraint became reckless once Jordan stopped moving. The defense maintained that Penny had never intended to seriously harm him and disputed that the hold alone caused his death. In December 2024, jurors failed to agree on a manslaughter charge. That charge was dismissed, and Penny was acquitted of criminally negligent homicide.
I was trying to keep him on the ground until the police came. I was praying that the police would come and take this situation over. I didn't want to be put in that situation, but I couldn't just sit still and let him carry out these threats.
He lived till 30 years old in New York, homeless. That's rare. Not a lot of people make it to 30 years old sleeping on a train car on a bridge. He helped me with my college application to get into my college, where I'm on my way to take my finals right now. Jordan never wanted money. Jordan wanted food. Jordan wanted resources. Jordan wanted a home.
The verdict ended the criminal case, but not the argument surrounding it. Jordan had been known to performers, outreach teams, hospitals, police, and the city's shelter system. His decline had unfolded publicly for years. His final moments, too, would unfold in a public space, with no chance for recourse. I would really like to hear your thoughts on this case, so please share them down below. Turning 21 is supposed to be a milestone, a celebration. For Jocelyn Turquiza, it was more than just a birthday. It was the beginning of a new chapter. She had come to the United States from Ecuador, hoping for a better future. She worked hard, holding down a job as a hotel housekeeper, and she was also saving up, dreaming of what life could become. And this birthday, it was meant to be special, and she wasn't going to be celebrating it alone. There was someone else in her life, someone she'd known since childhood. He was John Chakaguze Ilbis. They'd gone to school together in Ecuador, they shared a past, and now, years later, they had both ended up in the same country once again, reunited by fate or something else. John wanted to make her birthday special, unforgettable. He travelled from Baltimore to Syracuse, he rented an Airbnb, and he planned a surprise celebration just for her. He picked her up from work that day, waiting for her outside the hotel where she cleaned rooms. He had the gifts ready, a cake, a pair of sneakers, even miniature wine bottles with "I love you" written on them. This seems like a thoughtful gesture, really quite sweet, potentially the perfect birthday surprise. Surveillance cameras captured them walking up to the Airbnb together, phones in hand. And then later that night, the same CCTV captured John giving Jocelyn a piggyback back out of the property. But what happened in between these two pieces of footage, what this footage actually shows, will make your blood run cold. It's frankly one of the most disturbing things I have seen. Inside the Airbnb, Jocelyn had every reason to believe she was about to have a great night. The decorations, the cake, the gifts, everything seemed thoughtful, normal. But beneath the surface, something wasn't right. There were no other guests, there was no music, no signs of a real party. The elaborate effort, the rented Airbnb, the expensive trip and gifts was all just for her and nobody else. In fact, it seems that John set this up for an intimate encounter, but at some point that night, the warmth of the evening turned cold. Something snapped. John would in fact throttle his friend, and she would never regain consciousness. If this was somehow an accident, then John never called for help. He never tried to save her. Instead, he began cleaning up. And then, hours later, the security camera showed the piggyback. Jocelyn, though, was no longer alive. He was carrying her lifeless body in this horrifyingly playful manner. Her head hung limply. Her arms dangled at her sides as he walked towards his car. And in what must have been a moment of horror for John, as he made his way towards his vehicle, a police cruiser drove straight past him, but somehow it didn't stop. No one knew what he had done. John had just literally gotten away with murder. It seems that the man didn't panic. He didn't break down. Instead, he drove to Lincoln Park, a quiet wooded area in Syracuse. There, in the middle of the night, he dragged Jocelyn's body from the car and buried her in a shallow grave. Seemingly, there was no remorse, no hesitation. By the next morning, Jocelyn's family realized that something was wrong. She wasn't answering her phone. In fact, she seemed to have just disappeared. Panic then set in. Her family reported her missing, but days passed with no answers. For 4 days, in fact, John continued on like nothing had happened. But what he did next proved just how little he cared. Believe me, somehow this case gets even more unbelievable and even more infuriating. Instead of laying low, he ran off to New York City. And once he got there, he took out Jocelyn's credit cards and he started spending her money. A shopping spree with cash he had stolen from a friend that he had just ended. Most disgustingly of all, he even used her credit cards to buy an OF subscription, an act so grotesque, so devoid of human decency, it sent a chill down the spines of the investigators who later uncovered it. Meanwhile, Jocelyn's body was still out there, alone in the dirt. 4 days after she was reported missing, with police searching in vain, they finally found her right where John left her, buried in a shallow grave. Dumped, discarded, forgotten. At least that's what John thought and hoped, because the truth was catching up to him fast. He was about to be exposed as the monster that he truly is. Detectives quickly pieced together his movements. Security footage showed him leaving the Airbnb, and they realized it was in fact a lifeless body draped over his shoulders. And then days later, Jocelyn's family got the news. The evidence in his case was overwhelming. John was arrested in New York City after being assaulted and hospitalized, which is a bizarre twist in an already unexplainable crime. But there was still one massive question left unanswered. Why? In court, frustratingly, John had no explanation. He did admit to ending Jocelyn. He admitted to disposing of her body, but when it came to why, he had nothing to say. Nothing at all. Instead, he stood before Jocelyn's grieving family. He watched via video link from Ecuador and he begged for forgiveness. He said via a translator, "I feel really bad and ashamed for this situation that I've caused. I regret everything." But luckily, Judge Ten Limpert saw right through it. He said, "The lack of explanation for your behaviour is one of the most concerning aspects of this crime. It's something I'm sure the family will wrestle with for the rest of their lives. They can't understand it, nor can I, nor can the people of this community." 23 years to life. That was a sentence for what he did to his lifelong friend. It wouldn't answer the burning questions of why he did it, but for now, he could harm no more innocent people. The fact that Jocelyn's birthday and her final day on this earth were one and the same must only add to the pain of those that knew and loved her. A truly shocking and awful case. That CCTV footage will stick with me forever. Just after 7:30 on the morning of December the 22nd, 2024, an F train sat motionless at Coney Island's Stillwell Avenue station in Brooklyn. It was early on a Sunday and one carriage was almost empty. Inside, a woman appeared to be asleep. Her name was Debrina Kawam. She was 57 years old, originally from New Jersey, and had been staying in New York City's homeless shelter system for several months. To those who would soon see her, she was simply an unidentified woman, resting alone on a subway train, until, that is, another passenger approached her. There was no conversation and no visible argument. The man and the sleeping woman did not appear to know each other, and then came a moment of true horror. Without warning, he used a lighter to set her clothing alight. The material caught rapidly, and within seconds the situation was almost impossible to control. The man stepped off the train, but he did not run. Instead, he sat on a bench directly outside the carriage and watched. Video showed him remaining nearby as smoke filled the station. At one point, he appeared to use a shirt to fan the flames. Police officers working elsewhere in the station noticed the smoke and moved toward the train. A transit employee eventually used a fire extinguisher, but by the time the flames were brought under control, Debrina's time on this earth had ended. The man sitting nearby was captured clearly on police body cameras. The officers had unknowingly filmed the person they would soon be searching for, but he was not identified at the scene. He left and disappeared back into the subway system. Investigators circulated his image across the city. Several hours later, 3 high school students were traveling on another subway train when they recognized the face from the police photographs. They called 911. Officers stopped the train at Herald Square, kept the doors closed, and moved through the carriages until they found 33-year-old Sebastian Zapeta Khalil. A lighter was discovered in his possession. The arrest came roughly 6 hours after the attack, made possible by 3 teenagers who had paid attention to an image released that day. Zapeta Khalil was charged with murder and arson. He later pleaded not guilty. For Debrina, identification took much longer. The damage was so severe that investigators initially struggled to determine who she was. For 9 days, the woman at the center of the attack remained unnamed. Fingerprints, DNA work, and attempts to retrace her movements were used before police identified her on December 31st. While that process was still underway, false claims spread online. An invented name and an AI-generated portrait were circulated as though they showed the victim. The image had nothing to do with the woman on the train, yet it spread faster than the truth. When Debrina's real name was released, a clearer picture emerged. She had graduated from Passaic Valley Regional High School in 1985 and had previously lived in Toms River, New Jersey. Her final morning exposed several different failures at once. A vulnerable woman was attacked while sleeping in a public carriage. The suspected attacker remained close enough to be recorded by responding officers, yet left before anyone realized who he was. And before Debrina could even be identified, the internet had already created a false version of someone that didn't exist. And that's not to even mention the possible systemic failures that led to Debrina ending up on the street. The case became a symbol of public fear around the New York subway, and it's not hard to see why. Thank you so much for watching. I'm uploading daily true crime and dark content here on this channel, so make sure that you're subscribed, hit like on the video, and also drop a comment so you get shown more of my stuff. Please do be careful out there, and I'll see you